Jayom Vishnupad Paramhansa Paribrajakacharya Stotvara Satashi Shimad A.C. Bhakti-Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivas Arigor Bhaktavrinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinatha Shai Mukunda Radha Kundi Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Mayapur Dham Ki Jai Jagannath Puri Ki Jai Ganga Mai Ki Jai Jamuna Mai Ki Jai Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Samaveda Bhaktavrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru Angaranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. We're continuing the reading of Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, Volume 2, entitled Planting the Seed. Prabhupada is at the Bowery, and because the beginnings, this journal that Prabhupada was keeping in 1966 was not available at the time that the Lilamrita was written. Satsvarup Maharaj does not have a day-to-day program of what Prabhupada was doing, but we have that advantage now. So Satsvarup Maharaj's next thing that he wrote about, that he entered, was on April 27th. And we were going through day by day to hear what Prabhupada was doing, and we stopped at April 8th. So we're going to go through quickly and catch up with the Lilamrita, how Prabhupada was adjusting, going between three places actually. He was at 72nd Street still because he couldn't break his rental contract. He had to stay there for the month of April in order to get his deposit back. Plus, on weekends, he was still going to Dr. Mishra's Anand Ashram. And gradually, he was starting to hold his classes at the Bowery, and he was getting a very good reception there. 8 to 10 people were coming, and there was lots of room for the people so that it could be increased more and more. So this is Friday, April 8th. Today, the whole day and night, also, I stayed at Mr. Paul's loft. So Prabhupada, even from the first week, he was trying to spend as much time as possible there. Saw Elsie to inquire about the Library of Congress card. Not very encouraging. So just as nowadays we have the digital ISBN, that's the International Serial Book Number. You'll see that on the back of books. Not on this one because it's an old one. But that means that everything is serialized, all the books. So on the computer you can see who the author was, when it was made, who published it, everything. So in those days it was done manually through the Library of Congress. And they would assign a number to each book so that that book could be ordered for all the schools and colleges and libraries. So Prabhupada was trying to get that number for his Srimad Bhagavatam. Although the books had been put into, the embassy had purchased 18 sets of Prabhupada's books and put them into the major libraries in America, he still didn't have that number. So he was trying. They were approving him, but they weren't giving him the number. Evening there was meeting. 7 boys and girls attended. Contribution $5 and some fruits also. Expenditure bus fare 30 cents. It's 15 cents each way. So this picture is Prabhupada there. We were searching through all the different pictures of this time. So this is Prabhupada at the Bowery. He had a very nice corner there, and he had a writing desk, and he had a very nice typewriter. So things had improved there at the loft. April 9th, Saturday. Today I went to Dr. Mishra's apartment. He didn't leave the key with doorman, so I had some difficulty to enter the room. The doorman opened the door by his keys, and by entering the room, I saw that doctor got my note. So in America, in these high-rise apartments, there's a skeleton key. And that skeleton key can open any apartment in the whole building. So normally Dr. Mishra would leave the key with the doorman, but he forgot to do it that day. Anyway, I cooked some khichdi and took it because there was no flour. After a little rest, I took my typewriters and came down to my room at 72nd Street. From there, I came to Paul's loft. In the evening, Sussman met me. He brought some grains. So this Sussman was one of the young men who was coming to hear Prabhupada's, because on Saturday, Prabhupada wouldn't have a class. But still, on these off days, some of the young men and women who were coming to the classes will come and ask Prabhupada questions. And he very kindly brought some grains for Prabhupada. Paul would run errands. He would go get vegetables and fruits and different things that Prabhupada needed so that Prabhupada could spend more time with his typing. So he would pay Paul for the different errands that he was being sent on. Sunday, April 10th. Today, the whole day I remained at Paul's loft and did not go out. I paid Paul $1 for expenses. Today I am working on Harvey Cohen. He had left a big royal typewriter there and is very good for hard working. Paul is impressed with my mission in America. So Paul was a young boy, 17 years old when he came to New York. He was from the Midwest, and they don't have big cities there, so he was attracted to what he thought the counterculture was going to be in New York. Unfortunately, he got himself involved in taking LSD. So though he was a simple person and appreciated what Prabhupada was doing, because of his intoxication, later Prabhupada had trouble with him. Now let's see. There. April 11th. Today I took meals with Dr. Mishra. The expenditure for Dr. Mishra's tape recorder was $5. Paid to Paul expenses, $1. Bus fare, $45. So Prabhupada's expenses for the day were $6.45. He's only getting like $5 from the contributions, but overspending, because he was trying to get his tape recorder, which had been stolen. Other people were giving him tape recorders, but they were broken. So Prabhupada would have to pay for the repairs. April 12th. Today I had been to New India House. That's the Indian Embassy. Mr. Mukherjee of Passport Department kept my undertaking, and passport for necessary action will return on Monday the 18th instant, because Prabhupada's passport was expiring in June. So Mr. Mukherjee of the embassy, he was going to get Prabhupada got the clearance from Delhi through his Chandrasekhar. We had read about that. And now they were going to extend Prabhupada's passport for 2 years. Paul paid for battery, bus fare, expenditures, $130. Now, April 11th, this is 1966. And we have here April 11th in a room conversation in Bombay. This is when Prabhupada was ill. And he was remembering to the times when he started, which was 11 years earlier, 66, 77. Prabhupada says, in the history, it is unique. Crores of rupees property. You see how now Prabhupada is keeping every single penny that he spends, he's keeping account. By this time, 11 years later, crores of rupees property, and all over the world, buildings, temples. It is all Krishna's. Nobody can harm them. It is not for me. There is no history. In 10 years only, books like this, about 80 books Prabhupada had printed by then, which are being received with so much adoration. They are simply Krishna's. If I want to take credit personally, this is the wrong thing. So money does not come in that way unless Krishna gives. Janmaishvarya Shruta Shribir. So these 4 opulences of birth, we can't demand them. They're rewarded by Krishna according to our past activities of our previous life. our good birth, our opulences, our learning, and our beauty. These are the signs of punya, previous life's good activities. So Prabhupada, because he's taking no credit for himself whatsoever, because he took up the mission that his spiritual master had given him 43 years earlier, 1922, and he was caught up in family life at that time. He had a business, he had to raise 5 children. Finally, after 43 years, Prabhupada was free. He fulfilled that mission. And this is the quotation of that 1:826. My Lord, your Lordship can easily be approached, but only by those who are materially exhausted. Because one who is on the path of material progress, trying to improve himself with respectable parentage, great opulence, high education, and bodily beauty, cannot address you with sincere feeling. So now Prabhupada, having fulfilled all of his grihasta responsibilities, his sons were grown up to take care of his wife, marry off the daughters. Now he was on this mission, taking no credit whatsoever for himself, simply to carry out this mission. If Krishna wants, he can give the whole world. My father used to say, God has got 10 hands. If he wants to take away from you with 2 hands, how much you will protect. And when he wants to give you with 10 hands, with 2 hands, how much you will take it. That's a common, but people are after money. So Prabhupada, he came to America penniless. Now, 10, 11 years later, he has crores of rupees of property, temples all over the world, 5,000 disciples. This is just a few months before Prabhupada left the world. And with his 2 hands, what could he accept? But when Krishna wants to give, when he sees that a person is going to use properly in his service, then this is the result. So we see Prabhupada in the beginning, his first year in America, he hadn't even been in America 1 year yet. How he was struggling. No fixed residence. He would have to go to shower and eat 7 blocks away. And then finally, in the worst part of New York City, in the deepest slums, the Bowery, he gets a place living with a drug addict. Srila Prabhupada underwent such austerities in order to carry out the mission of his spiritual master and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. April 13th. Today I received one letter from the chief assistant of the governor of New York. Paul's tape recorder is all right. So what Prabhupada had done was he had written to the governor, he had written to the President of the United States, and he wanted to get opportunity to preach the philosophy of Sanatana Dharma. And he wanted to do this through publications in newspapers and getting the opportunity to lecture in different institutions. So we'll find out a little later what finally happened with the governor. In the evening, 8 ladies and gentlemen attended the meeting. Now it's being held at the Bowery. So the numbers are increasing and the space has increased. Satsrup Maharaj, he wrote an article for the Back to Godhead because more and more information came later, years after the Lilamrita was written. So he said that the room where Prabhupada was staying, where he rented, that room 301, it was the size of the dais that Prabhupada was sitting on in the Bowery. The Bowery room was so big that just the dais means like the manch, the stage that Prabhupada would sit on, which is just a wooden stage. That was the size of Prabhupada's room at 72nd Street. So now, in the Bowery, at the loft, Prabhupada had enough room, and he was getting enough attention from the musicians and the artists who lived in that area, that they were all coming for a spiritual experience. On Thursday, the 14th of April, Elsie paid $31.50 for books. That's 2 sets of books that she got. and then he has his different expenses. So his income minus his outcome expenses, everything totaled to $31.50 that day. Friday the 15th. Books delivered to Elsie. 2 sets of books for sale in charge of Paul. So in case anyone came when Prabhupada wasn't there, he kept sets of books with Paul for selling. Mr. Anderson, assistant to governor, met. He's little sympathetic. He says that I may expect some news from the Asia Society, New York. So having written to the governor, now one of the assistant undersecretaries was meeting with Prabhupada, and he was trying to align him with what he felt would be societies that would be interested in Prabhupada's mission. Yolanda will take me to the ashram tomorrow at 2 p.m. So still Dr. Mishra was depending and appreciating that Prabhupada was still coming to the Ananda ashram for the kirtans, and at the same time he was meeting people there who had the opportunity to later attend Prabhupada's classes. The uptown group, they were not interested in coming down to the Bowery. But the young people who Prabhupada was meeting at Ananda ashram, such as Harvey Cohen, who gave the apartment, the loft to Prabhupada, they were willing to come down to the Bowery. And Prabhupada was, after his kirtans, though he couldn't lecture, he was able to invite people to come. On Saturday, Yolanda took me to the ashram, and there was kirtan in the evening. 17th April. Today, up to 5 p.m., I was in the ashram. Came back at 6:15. That means it was an hour and 15 minutes drive outside of the city. It was a very nice part of the upstate New York. Is very beautiful with rolling hills and forests, and there was a lake there. To 72nd Street. Paul was there. In the evening, I came back to the Bowery with the suitcase. So now Prabhupada is starting to shift what little bit he had. He was starting to shift his belongings to the Bowery with Paul. One book due to Elsie was delivered via the studio. Monday, April 18th. Today I took delivery of the passport from the New India House. It is renewed to a period of 2 years more, i.e. up to 9th June 1968. So this gives Prabhupada a very good shot in the arm, because the American government was extending his visas 3 months at a time. Now the Indian government, they'd extended his passport, so he had, now it is 1966, another 2 years. And this gave him enthusiasm so that he wasn't interested in quickly going back to India. I wanted to see Mr. Bogart, but he was not there. I left one note for him. So we remember that Mr. Bogart, he was an environmentalist who was very much opposed to nuclear power. And he and Srila Prabhupada, being both of older age, they had a friendship. And Mr. Bogart was helping Prabhupada to find a publisher, because Prabhupada wanted to print his Bhagavad-Gita, and he wanted to continue the printing of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And in America, you needed a publisher because no one has their own printing press. So, but no one was, at this point, till now, no one was interested in publishing Prabhupada's books. So with the help of Mr. Bogart, he was trying to find a good publisher. 19th April. Today I went to see Dr. J.K. Banerjee, but he was not in his office. I left on his table the matter for press report. No letter received. So Prabhupada was also writing, if you remember a few months back, he wrote to all the major newspapers about his mission so that they would print an article, and about his classes so that people who were interested in yoga and Bhagavad Gita could attend the classes. It would have been like free advertisement. So Mr. Banerjee was helping him contact with these newspapers. Wednesday, April 20th, paid Paul $1 for expenditure. Today I took my meals at Dr. Mishra's place. I took back the tape recorder and tried for its repair without any success. So during these Bowery classes, we saw a few weeks ago, Prabhupada was able to tape about 8 of his classes, although there were many other classes. So we missed some of those classes. But those classes are still available for us to hear. You can, they're in, there's Vedabase, you can read that. There's the folios. So the transcripts and the lectures themselves are still available if anyone wants to hear these lectures that Prabhupada was giving at the Bowery. Evening meeting from 7 to 9, only 4 persons attended. Now, this week, Prabhupada's not giving too many details of what he's doing. This is when he's back and forth between the 2 places. So Prabhupada was having his meetings now at the Bowery. 5 people came on Friday. And then again, the weekend came, and Prabhupada went to Anand Ashram. Dr. Mishra paid for all the expenses for his going. So though Dr. Mishra and Prabhupada had philosophical differences, Dr. Mishra was still assisting Srila Prabhupada as much as Prabhupada allowed him to. Before, Dr. Mishra was paying all of Prabhupada's expenses, fooding, giving him a place to stay, but now Prabhupada was asserting his independence so that he would be free to preach, which was the title of the previous chapter. And now Prabhupada practically had full independence, except for the last responsibility that Dr. Mishra requested from him, which was to continue giving the kirtans at the Anand Ashram. Received 2 letters at 72nd Street, one from Vrindavan, that was Prabhupada's youngest son, Vrindavan Chandra Day, and the other from the Secretary to the President of the United States. Talked with Mrs. Sulyan Richard. I don't know who she is. There's no mention of her anywhere else. Then on the Monday the 25th, I went to see Mr. Bogart. He was not in the office, but his assistant was given a note to contact Pitcher. Pitcher is the landlord of the 72nd Street, to inform them that Prabhupada would be vacating at the end of that month. Saw the Marine office. Free pass to Paul denied. So Prabhupada, he was still considering, because he had that free ticket back to India, he was still considering that now Paul, showing some interest in Prabhupada's mission, he would bring Paul back to India, and he would train Paul, and he wanted to get a free passage for Paul also to go on the ship with him. But the shipping office refused him. So later he will write to Sumati Morarji and ask personally. Came back and settled to postpone return back to India. One letter received from Tirtha Maharaj, by his responsibility as promised by him. So we haven't heard about Tirtha Maharaj for weeks and weeks now. Tirtha Maharaj, of course, this is when Mr. Singhania, Padampat Singhania, had shown interest in making a temple in New York City, but then he withdrew that interest. But at the same time, Prabhupada was trying to get the money exchange so that donations that he could get in India could be brought to America. And he had requested Tirtha Maharaj to help him with that. But Tirtha Maharaj, it says here, bypassing his responsibility as promised by him. Tirtha, Vrindavan and Robert. So Robert Nelson, who we had heard about, he was still attending Prabhupada's classes in the mornings. He was still trying to help Prabhupada with his publishing, going to different publishing houses, and going to try to make a record of Prabhupada's kirtans. So he was still a faithful appreciator of Srila Prabhupada and his mission. And he was now writing letters to Prabhupada while Prabhupada was at the Bowery. Tirtha Maharaj letter also replied, he should honestly execute his promise. I have no objection if he corresponds directly with Sir Padampat. Evening meeting held. So the contribution of that evening meeting was $4.60. And today we had a special class by Gargamuni. Gargamuni explained that during the classes, at the end of the class, Prabhupada would cut up an apple, and there would be a basket, and they would pass the basket around. Everyone would take a piece of apple and put in whatever donation they felt inclined to give. Some would give 25 cents, and some would give $1. So each evening meeting, Prabhupada would get some donations. Now, in America, they have something called daylight saving time, because in the northern hemisphere where it's cold, in the wintertime, the sun rises late and sets very early. So in the springtime, they set their clocks forward by 1 hour, so that instead of waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning when it's still pitch black, because the sun doesn't come up until 7 or 8, they put their clocks forward. Spring forward, that means what was 6 o'clock becomes 7 o'clock, and then later in the fall backwards, so that the people get more sunlight during their working hour times. So the clock now is April time, so they put the clock forward. It says 1 hour clock enhanced. We don't have to do that in India because we have so much wonderful sunlight all year round. It's such a blessing. When I would have to go visit my family in America, after living in India, you go to America and it's like you're blind because there's just not enough sunlight there. And here we're so blessed with sunlight and seasons. Here we have 6 seasons. There's only 4 seasons, and 2 of them are freezing cold. This is in the places like New York City. Can't go out. Tuesday. Today I did not go out, so you can't go out. So Prabhupada was selling his books. Now, normally, because the people who were coming to see Prabhupada, they weren't very rich either. So they would buy only the first volume. And it was a set of 3 books for $15. So after a while, there were no volume 1s left because they weren't buying the full sets. So I know that, for instance, my marriage gift was a volume 2 because that was all there was in those days. Wednesday, 27th. So now we've caught up. Today, whole day, I did not go out again. One letter sent to Srimati Sumati Morarji requesting to allow free passage for Paul. But we'll see later on. She will also send Mr. Chokshi will write a letter saying, only we will give free passage for you, which was a blessing in disguise. Neither Prabhupada ever used that free passage back, nor would he have wanted to bring Paul back after what happened later. So now, 28th of April is a big day. Today I brought all things from 72nd Street to Paul's loft. So now Prabhupada has fully transferred himself to the loft and no more meetings at the 72nd Street. So now we'll go on with the reading. April 27th. He wrote to his friends in India describing his relationship with David Allen. Now in the Lilamrita, the person who Prabhupada is living with is called David Allen. But in all of Prabhupada's and Mukunda Das Goswami's book, and Prabhupada's letters and Prabhupada's journals, his name is Paul Murray. So for some reason there's a difference in the names. This is what Prabhupada wrote. He was attending my class at 72nd Street along with others. And when I experienced this theft case in my room, he invited me to his residence. So I am with him and training him. He has good prospect because already he has given up all bad habits, or so Prabhupada believed. In this country, illicit connection with women, smoking, drinking, and eating of meats are common affairs. Besides that, there are other bad habits, like using toilet paper after evacuating, etc. It's unheard of in India to use such a thing as toilet paper. But by my request, he has given up 90% of his old habits, and he is chanting Maha Mantra regularly. So I am giving him the chance, and I think he is improving. Tomorrow I have arranged for some prasadam distribution, and he has gone to purchase some things from the market. So now Satsvarup Maharaj will explain a little bit more about who he calls David, and what his explanation is, and what Mukunda, because Mukunda at that time, he had started coming to the Bowery. Satsvarup Maharaj only met Prabhupada at 26 2nd Avenue, a month or two later. So Mukunda was the only person whose writings we have who describe who this person was, Paul, and it does not corroborate with what Satsvarup Maharaj is saying. So we can take it however we want to take it, but according to Mukunda, Paul was a 17-year-old boy, and here's what Satsvarup Maharaj says. When David first came to the Bowery, he appeared like a clean-cut college student. He was 21, 6 feet tall, blue-eyed, handsome, and intelligent-looking. Now, the way Mukunda describes him in his book, Miracle on 2nd Avenue, was that he was an adolescent, 17 years old, with pimples, and just a young boy, very new to New York City life. Most of his new friends in New York were older and considered him a kid. David's family lived in East Lansing, Michigan, and his mother was paying $100 monthly to sublease the loft. There's no mention anywhere that Prabhupada was asked to pay for the loft. Harvey Cohen, he made a stipulation with Paul that I will rent this loft to you, but you have to allow the Swami to live there as well. So Prabhupada was getting free accommodation, and Paul was paying for it. Paul's mother was paying. Although he did not have much experience, he had read that a new realm of mind expansion was available through psychedelic drugs, and he was heading fast into the hazardous world of LSD. His meeting with the Swami came at a time of radical change and profoundly affected his life. Now, this is what David says. It was a really good relationship I had with the Swami, but I was overwhelmed by the tremendous energy of being that close to him. It spurred my consciousness very fast. Even my dreams at night would be so vivid of Krishna consciousness. I was often sleeping when the Swami was up, because he was up late in the night working on his translations. That's possibly where a lot of the consciousness and dreams just flowed in because of that deep relationship. It also had to do with studying Sanskrit. There was a lot of immediate impact with the language. The language seemed to have such a strong mystical quality, the way he translated it word for word. So Mukunda's observation of all of this was, it was not very favorable. He felt that Paul became like a mindless follower of Srila Prabhupada. And his impression was, first, quite negative, thinking, oh, is this the way I'm going to become if I become a follower of Srila Prabhupada? So he did not feel that it was a healthy way that Paul was reacting with Srila Prabhupada. And he saw that from the first day he visited Prabhupada's first class. He saw Paul to be an assistant of Srila Prabhupada, but not with full consciousness of Prabhupada's erudition and Prabhupada's aristocracy. And now Satsvarupa Maharaj explains why. Because he was entering into the hazardous world of LSD. And LSD is a mind-changing, mind-bending, very strong psychotropic drug. So it would have been very difficult for Paul to have behaved normally if he was under the influence of any type of strong intoxication like that. And Mukunda was able to see that immediately, that something was not quite right. And that came out later. We'll read as we go along. Prabhupada's old friend from uptown, Robert Nelson, continued to visit him on the Bowery. He was impressed by Prabhupada's friendly relationship with David, who he saw was learning many things from the Swami. Mr. Robert bought a small American-made hand organ similar to an Indian harmonium and donated it to David for with Prabhupada. So this little harmonium, they used to, because they didn't know how to play the harmonium, they would just put it on a drone. And they would go along with the drone. Drone is just one key, like that, as Prabhupada sang, because they didn't know how to play it properly. At 7 in the morning, Mr. Robert would come by, and after Bhagavatam class, every morning Prabhupada would give a Bhagavatam class, and then Monday, Wednesday, and Friday in the evenings from 8 to 10, he would give the Bhagavad-Gita class. He would talk informally with Prabhupada, telling his ideas for making records and selling books. He wanted to continue helping the Swami. They would sit in chairs near the front window, and Mr. Robert would listen while Prabhupada talked for hours about Krishna and Lord Chaitanya. So Robert was very fortunate. He had a real service attitude. He was a very simple young man, and he was sincerely trying to help Prabhupada along the right lines. So he came all out of his way to attend the classes every morning of Prabhupada's. New people began coming to see Prabhupada on the Bowery. Carl Jurgens, a 30-year-old black man from the Bronx, he wasn't very black though, he was quite light-skinned, had attended Cornell University. According to Mukunda, he had attended Princeton University and was a professor. So we have, Mukunda explains at the beginning of his book, I read it last week, that there are some differences in what he has written and what Satsvarupa Maharaj has written, but what he has written, he's only tried to present truthfully according to what his knowledge is. So these are just small, detailed differences. Cornell is one university, Princeton is another university. And was now independently studying Indian religion and Zen Buddhism. He had experimented with drugs as psychedelic tools, and he had an interest in the music and poetry of India. He was influential among his friends and tried to interest them in meditation. He had even been dabbling in Sanskrit. Now this is an interview with Carl, which is quite interesting. We'll read it now. Carl says, I had just finished reading a book called The Wonder That Was India. I had gotten the definition of a sannyasi and a brahmachari, and so forth. There was a vivid description in that particular book of how you could see a sannyasi coming down the road with his saffron robe. It must have made more than just a superficial impression on me, because it came to me this one chilly evening. I was going to visit Michael Grant, that's Mukunda Das. Probably going to smoke some marijuana and sit around. Maybe play some music. And I was coming down Hester Street. Hester Street is because all of these Lower East Side is different ghettos. So Bowery was the ghetto or the slum where all of the drunkards lived. Just around the corner was Chinatown where the Chinese immigrants lived. And then just around the other corner was Hester Street where all the Jewish immigrants lived. So he was coming down Hester Street. If you make a left on the Bowery, you can go up to Mike's place on Grand Street. But it's funny that I chose to go that way because the shorter way would have been to go down Grand Street. But if I had gone that way, I would probably have missed Swamiji. So I decided to go down Hester and then make a left. All of a sudden, I saw in this dingy alcove a brilliant saffron robe. As I passed, I saw it was Swamiji knocking on the door, trying to gain entrance. So the door where Prabhupada was staying was sometimes locked. And he would have to bang on the door in order for Paul to come down and open it, 4 flights of steps. There were 2 bums hunched up against the door. It was like a 2-part door. One of them was sealed and the other was locked. I think we have some pictures of this. This was Prabhupada walking down the road. The original picture, he's in his orange robes. And then we have the door somewhere. Wait a minute. Oh, I didn't put it in. It was in last week's. Sorry. Okay. Okay. It was like a 2-part door. One of them was sealed and the other was locked. The 2 bums were lying on either side of Swamiji. One of these men had actually expired. That means he had died, which often happened, and you had to call the police or health department to get them. I don't think I saw the men lying in the doorway until I walked up to Swamiji and asked him, "Are you a sannyasi?" And he answered, "Yes." We started this conversation about how he was starting a temple, and he mentioned Lord Chaitanya and the whole thing. He just came out with this flow of strange things to me, right there in the street, but I knew what he was talking about somehow. I had the familiarity of having just read this book and delved into Indian religion, so I knew that this was a momentous occasion for me, and I wanted to help him. We banged on the door, and eventually we got into the loft. He invited me to come to a kirtan, and I came back later that night for my first kirtan. From that point on, it was a fairly regular thing, 3 times a week. At one point, Swamiji asked me to stay with him, and I stayed for about 2 weeks. So Carl Jurgens, highly intelligent, a professor, very influential amongst the intelligentsia of that area. He had a wife. Although he was black, he was married to a white woman. Her name was Eva, and she was a feminist. So she resented Carl's relationship with Srila Prabhupada because their relationship involved breaking all the 4 regulative principles. They had cats and dogs in their loft. She had a high-paying job, and she was paying for the loft. And she felt that Carl was being influenced by the Swamiji, because the Swamiji, of course, was preaching no intoxication, and Carl was known for his best quality hashish. He was known amongst his friends. And no illicit sex. And of course that was out of the question, because no one would consider, I mean, you get married for those things, and Prabhupada was explaining that it should only be used for procreation, so she objected to that. And Prabhupada objected to having cats and dogs in their home, so, and the eating of meat, so many things. So she felt that Karl was getting pulled away from their relationship by the Swamiji, and therefore there was resentment. She would never attend his programs. And later, when Prabhupada had to flee because of Paul's behavior, he first went to Karl's place, and Karl gave him a place to stay, and his wife was not at all happy about that. So Karl was most helpful for Srila Prabhupada. Karl was the one who arranged for the incorporation of ISKCON through a lawyer. So you see here, because Karl was searching for spiritual knowledge, at that time Zen Buddhism was very popular, so he was studying that, but he came across this book, The Wonder That Was India, that had prepared him for meeting Prabhupada. And because he had already understood some of the terms, he immediately accepted Prabhupada into his life, and he was one of the first disciples of Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada named him Karlapati Das. So he helped Prabhupada a lot during these Bowery days, but then when Prabhupada finally, it was Karl and Mukunda, they went with Prabhupada to get the 26 Second Avenue storefront. But after Prabhupada moved, although 26 Second Avenue was just about 10 minutes away from the Bowery walking, not many people followed Prabhupada to 26 Second Avenue. So though Karl took initiation, he became less active in the 26 Second Avenue days. Okay. It was perhaps because of Karl's interest in Sanskrit that Prabhupada began holding Sanskrit classes. Well, actually, what Mukunda describes is, it was Mukunda's idea to have Sanskrit classes. Because when Mukunda first went to Prabhupada's classes, he couldn't understand Prabhupada's accent very well, and he couldn't understand what Prabhupada was speaking about. Spiritual consciousness, I'm not this body, things. These were new concepts to him. But Prabhupada would intersperse his lectures with Sanskrit slokas, which we all know that when we hear Prabhupada's, 50% of some of Prabhupada's lectures are Sanskrit slokas. So Mukunda was very impressed by this, being a musician, and he wanted to learn Sanskrit himself, and he thought that other young people in the area would also be interested. So it was Mukunda who went up one day, one afternoon, and asked Prabhupada, would you be willing to give a Sanskrit class? And Prabhupada was not particularly interested, but because Mukunda asked him, he said, well, you can arrange, and because I give classes Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we can have it on a Saturday. So it was too soon for Mukunda to have the class that Saturday, but the next Saturday, 5 people came. And Prabhupada, he started with the Ishvaraha Paramaha Krishna Sachidananda Vigraha Anadir Adir Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam. So Prabhupada was teaching them Sanskrit through the slokas that he wanted them to learn. And he would have them write in their notepads the Sanskrit. But after a while they lost interest, and Prabhupada didn't want to continue it because it wasn't something that he was particularly interested in. Karl and David and others would spend hours learning Sanskrit under Prabhupada's guidance. Using a chalkboard he found in the loft, Prabhupada taught the alphabet. So what Mukunda says is that that chalkboard, you know, it was like one of these, but black. It was so broken, he thought that Prabhupada had found it in the garbage somewhere and brought it up to the loft. Prabhupada taught the alphabet, and his students wrote their exercises in notebooks. Prabhupada would look over their shoulders to see if they were writing correctly and would review their pronunciation. His students were learning not simply Sanskrit, but the instructions of Bhagavad-Gita. Each day he would give them a verse to copy in the Sanskrit alphabet, Devanagari, translate it into the Roman alphabet, and then translate word for word into English. But their interest in Sanskrit waned, and Prabhupada gradually gave up the daily classes to spend time working on his own translations of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So Mukunda, being a musician, he felt that this Sanskrit would be very popular amongst his friends, but neither Prabhupada was particularly interested, and eventually the other students were not interested, so those classes were stopped after a few weeks. His new friends may have regarded these lessons as Sanskrit classes, but actually they were bhakti classes. He had not come to America as the ambassador of Sanskrit. His Guru Maharaj had ordered him to teach Krishna consciousness, but since he had found in Karl and some of his friends a desire to investigate Sanskrit, he encouraged it. As a youth, Lord Chaitanya had also started a Sanskrit school with the real purpose of teaching love of Krishna. He would teach in such a way that every word meant Krishna, and when his students objected, he closed the school. Similarly, when Prabhupada found that his students' interest in Sanskrit was transitory, and since he himself had no mission on behalf of Sanskrit linguistics, he gave it up. By the standard of classical Vedic scholars, it takes 10 years for a boy to master Sanskrit grammar. And if one does not start until his late 20s or 30s, it is usually too late. Certainly none of Swami's students were thinking of entering a 10-year concentration in Sanskrit grammar, and even if they were, they would not realize spiritual truth simply by becoming grammarians. Prabhupada thought it better to utilize his own Sanskrit scholarship in translating the verses of Srimad Bhagavatam into English, following the Sanskrit commentaries of the previous authorities. Otherwise, the secrets of Krishna consciousness would remain locked away in the Sanskrit. Teaching Carl Jurgen's Devanagari, Sandhi, verbal conjunctions, and noun declensions was not going to give the people of America transcendental Vedic knowledge. Better that he utilize his proficiency in Sanskrit for translating many volumes of the Bhagavatam into English for millions of potential readers. Yes, so Srila Prabhupada, he was taking his Bhaktivedanta purports from the books that had been printed by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. These were all in Bengali script, and for each sloka, there were 6 different commentaries from 6 previous acharyas, such as Sridhar Swami, Jiva Goswami, like that. You can see one of Prabhupada's, the last Bhagavatam that Prabhupada was translating from. We have one copy in Prabhupada's house. The other copies are all kept in Los Angeles because Prabhupada, they needed those for the transliteration and checking the spelling and things like that. So we have that last one here. And if anyone wants to see it, if you can read Bengali, because even the Sanskrit was given in the Bengali script. Even the 6 Goswamis, if you go to the Research Institute, is Bengali script, though it was Sanskrit, because they were Bengali. So Prabhupada, that was why Prabhupada would give us the original Devanagari, and in the first book that Prabhupada printed with the first printed here was Ishopanishad, that only had 18 mantras. And in the back of that book was the Devanagari alphabet, and you could very easily, this is how I learned the Sanskrit, you check that, you go to the mantras, very simply, you could learn how to read Sanskrit. But Prabhupada was so kind that he gave the transliterations for us, and to prove that Prabhupada's translations and purports were absolutely with not his commentary, but according to what the verse actually was meaning, he then gave the word-for-word translations. So there would be no doubt whatsoever in anybody's mind about what Prabhupada was translating, why he was translating in that way, because you could check every single word. So Prabhupada, he was the greatest scholar of Sanskrit. He had studied Sanskrit throughout his whole childhood, up to college. He was a Sanskrit scholar, and he was perfectly qualified through his spiritual master's order, and by taking shelter of his spiritual master's books, translations, and the commentaries, the tikas of the previous acharyas, to present these books to us. Now we also, the same book that Mukunda purchased for these Sanskrit classes, I can tell you the name next week, we also were studying those Sanskrit texts, but Prabhupada never encouraged us to become Sanskrit scholars, because as much Sanskrit as we needed to learn were already given in Prabhupada's books. So now it's 7 o'clock, and we'll continue. Next week, we have more interviews from some of the students who were coming to hear Prabhupada. It gets more and more interesting as they tell their stories and how they met Srila Prabhupada. All glories to Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.